Start. I'm just going to start with muting you all. I'm very sorry for that. There you go. You can unmute yourself if you want to say something, so don't worry. Throughout the presentation, I might admit some people if they come there we go, into the waiting room. There we go. So welcome. My name is Jos Bongers. I'm one of the neurologists at the Glasgow Seizure Clinic, and I'm a diploma in veterinary neurology. I'm joined here today with Pauline. Pauline is, some of you may have already known her. She is a epilepsy vet and kind of our seizure clinic ambassador. She's been with us for quite a while now and helping us kind of finding that connection between vets and owners. She's had a dog with epilepsy and has been through everything, so she'll butt in once in a while. And then tonight we're also joined by Hannah. I'm not sure if she's here yet, but she's from Vet Plus, and they're a company that has lots of good nutraceuticals involving epilepsy as well. So if you have any questions about their product, feel free to either put them in the chat box or email us via the Seizure Clinic. All right. So for today, the topic will be about lifestyle management and seizure monitoring. We had some topics before that were a bit similar, so there might be a little bit of overlap. And I think this evening, compared to the other evenings, will be a bit shorter. This is also the first one that we're doing fully online. So in terms of kind of how it works, if you have any questions, if it's an urgent question and you really have something to add, feel free to unmute yourself and give us your share your experiences with us, and we love to hear from you, because ultimately we'd like to have that feedback and help us and the other way around. But we'd like to work as much as we can via the chat box. So if you have any input or questions, feel free to put it in the chat box. I won't be looking at it during the talk. However, Pauline will have a run through it, and she'll note down all your questions, and then she can let us know. Yeah. So just to give you a little bit of information about the seizure clinic. So in Glasgow, we have a dedicated seizure clinic where we treat seizure cases only, so dogs or cats with epilepsy, and we give you kind of a whole run through about what it means to have a pet with epilepsy, what are the underlying causes, and also how can we manage it. So it's a bit of an elaborate clinic compared to your routine neurology clinic. We also have a website, so I put it down here, petseizureclinic.co.uk. There are regular updates. It's still in the making, so be a bit patient, but we are really working hard at it. If you have any direct questions, feel free to email us as well on the email address provided below. So tonight's structure, so we're going to talk about seizure monitoring at home, what to record about daily life shifts, people with epilepsy and pets with epilepsy. Then a guest speaker. So we have Samantha Lindley. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here today. She really wanted to. However, she's caught up with something else. But Samantha Lindley, for people that don't know her, she's a behavioral specialist. She started the behavioral clinic in Glasgow in 1997, so quite a while ago already. And she's been teaching veterinarians, undergrads, nurses, a lot about behavior and particularly about acupuncture. She also lectures a lot, and she is very well connected to the seizure clinic as well. So she has a little talk for us in store. Then, yeah, if you have any questions, raise your hand or just unmute yourself, and otherwise put your questions in the chat box. Then another thing that's just an open question for the chat box, which we were quite curious to know, is what is the thing that you wish people would understand more about a dog with seizures? Is there something that you say, hey, this is quite particular, which I wish people would know? I'll give you a few minutes, but I'll continue talking in the meanwhile. So one thing that we see mostly is the emotional and practical toll that it takes on people caring for a dog with epilepsy. So it's not about how to monitor seizures or how, etc. It's really that bit. Because what does it mean living with epilepsy, and for people and for people with dogs with epilepsy, is that you're always on sharp. You're constantly vigilant when you're out, when you're even some people take their dogs to their bedroom just to monitor them more closely. So you're kind of always on in that sense. Some people struggle with going out, finding babysitters, etc. So it can have an impact on your life. Sometimes we need to modulate our house a little bit to make it a bit more safe for our pets. Of course, anxiety plays quite a big role in living with a pet with epilepsy. Anxiety is a very normal thing to feel, and everyone feels it. And we can try to ignore it as much as we can, or try to cope with it as much as we can. But it's a normal feeling, and it's something that we see quite a lot with managing epilepsy. And of course, financial commitments and also important is to celebrate the small wins. So going for a nice walk, just enjoying your pet. Yeah. So back to you, Pauline. Have you seen any
Yeah,
chat
so
box?
basically everything that you just said is what's come up in the chat box. So how traumatic it is as an owner to go through it.
Mm.
Unable to leave the dog alone, or feeling that you can't leave the dog alone, you're having to take the dog everywhere with you, how stressful and exhausting it is. And I think everybody who's had an epileptic dog will understand the exhaustion and lack of sleep and worry and seizures through the night and things like that. So basically everything that you've just said is exactly what people are saying in the chat box. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's important to acknowledge that, that once you do have these feelings, that you're not alone in that. That is very normal to yeah, that these feelings come up, and that quite
Yeah.
often people don't know that, so don't realize it.
Yeah.
So seizure monitoring, why do we do it? Of course, to improve the seizure control. If we know more about how many seizures there are, we can adjust our medication, because that's the cornerstone still. We can adjust our treatment on that. We can once we monitor our seizures, we can potentially find triggers. We can be early with emergency treatment. We can, in that sense, we can improve the quality of life of you and your dog by kind of reducing that unpredictability, and feeling a little bit more in control. And we can also communicate better with our vets if once we know a little bit more about our dog's seizures. So it really kind of bridges the gap between veterinary care and day-to-day living. Now, this is one of the posts that we shared on Facebook, and the answer was that in dogs and cats we tend to underreport seizures, and in people we tend to overreport. Now, these data are not clear cut, and there's loads of studies out there, but it does tell us like, hey, actually, there's potentially more seizure activity going on than we know. So what is really important is, do we know what we actually need to record or can record? So if you have any input on what do you record? Is it just the seizure frequency? Are there other things that you're putting down?
I know personally that I recorded a lot of behaviour as well, in the run up to seizures, when I noticed sort of strange behaviour and things.
Yeah.
So that's Craig says how long it lasts. So I presume that means just record the duration of the seizure.
Yeah, I think behavior is a very good one, and we'll come to that later as well. That's
Yeah.
often forgotten, that there are some behavioral changes as well that we often see.
Yeah. So we've got time, frequency, strength as well. I think that's quite a good one,
Yeah.
because obviously some can be a bit more violent than others. Yeah. So just having a wee look through here. Using an app to record date and time and how long seizure lasts, whether he was awake or asleep. So pretty much all the details surrounding the seizures, I think. Somebody's saying food that they had before it. So yeah, mostly
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
duration and severity and things before and after seizures, I think, is what people seem to record.
Yeah, yeah. Food I've not heard before, but it might be one of the things that triggers that particular dog,
Mm.
or potentially, and they wanted to see if that's repeatable. Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. So for seizure monitoring, it's really about the how, what, and why. So how do I recognize epileptic signs? What does a veterinary neurologist want to know, or what does my vet want to know, and why would I do this basically? Why would this help me? So I think to start off with, we'd like to make sure that we're actually dealing with seizure activity, and also that you know what you're looking for. So quite often what happens is that a seizure happens, or something that looks like a seizure. Many people manage to record it, or describe it to their vets, and they confirm it's a seizure, and that's that. Then there's loads on the internet where you can read what is a seizure, but let's go back to basis and make sure that we know actually what are seizures and how do they look like. So if we have a seizure or an epileptic seizure, we can divide them up into four big phases. And I must admit, two of them are usually the ones that you see. The other two are not very common. So if you don't see them, then it might just that your dog doesn't have that. So first phase is the prodromal phase. And it's a phase where sometimes we can see that dogs or cats can be a bit more restless, a bit more anxious, a bit more sometimes sensitive. And that can be days before a seizure happens. And sometimes that can also be just that you think, okay, it's just a bit of an off day. So it can be really difficult to really blame this on a seizure, or associate with this with a seizure. Then the second one is a pre-ictal phase. It's a phase that is really minutes, sometimes hours before a seizure. Usually there's a bit more intense, these signs, but they can be quite similar to prodromal signs. Again, that they may be nervous or withdrawn. Sometimes we see that they can hypersalivate a little bit, or they seem a bit absent. And sometimes these signs can also overlap with the actual seizure. So that's your ictal phase. And the most common one that we see is what we call a generalized seizure. And that's really when we have the paddling, but we'll come through that in a sec. So that's the ictus, or the actual seizure that we normally talk about. And then the post-ictal phase, and that's usually minutes to hours following this ictal phase. And then we can see confusion, restless, etc. So your dog has stopped paddling, or your cat stopped paddling, but they're not completely their normal selves again. Now, number 3 and number 4 are usually the ones that you can see quite clearly. Number 1 and number 2, not so much. And sometimes they're there and sometimes they're not there. So when we go first to the prodromal phase, most common ones that we see are increased clinginess or anxiety and restlessness. So those are the most common ones that have been reported. Now, research is not exhaustive, it's not extensive, so there might be multiple other ones. So if you have one that you see in your dog or cat, please feel free to share it with us. Other things can be hiding, whining, barking. Those are the things that we already mentioned a little bit. We can also see sensory changes, such as staring into space, being confused, or being sensitive to light or sound. And sometimes we see also autonomic signs that we call, or like vomiting, diarrhea, salivating. So those are more the sensory and physical changes. Then, so what we want to record, we want to keep next to our seizure diary also a behavioral log. So particularly if you have it in your seizure diary incorporated, you can do it before the seizures. Just note any changes that you see in behavior in the 24 to 72 hours before a seizure happening, and also note the duration and the date. So why is this helpful? Because if you do see any of these signs, you can limit the stress or excitement that you go through in the for example, in that day or the next few days, for example, don't go out for that walk with loads of other dogs where your dog's also always been very, very excited about, or a stressful event, maybe in that particular time where you see, hey, this is normally the behavior that he shows before a seizure. Maybe avoid that, and also just be ready with medication at hand, or sometimes we have a treatment plan where we increase the medications temporarily a little bit. So kind of those kind of plans to really be prepared. Then the pre-ictal phase, I already mentioned that is quite similar to the prodromal phase. However, we see that these signs can be a bit more intense, and they may overlap with the actual seizure as well. So for the pre-ictal phase, I wouldn't say there's many things that will help us apart from maybe being even a bit more ready with your anti-seizure medication, or with a safe environment. But this one is usually very, very short. There's some articles about this. They kind of group them together. And as I said, fear, restlessness, and clinginess are so far the ones that are mostly seen. And then most of these signs are less than 5 minutes, so quite soon. Pauline, have you noticed any in the chat box?
Yes, so it looks as if quite a few people pick up on the prodromal phase, actually. So there's a few where the dog just looks a bit vacant, maybe looks as if it's not sort of hearing properly, staring into space. So really kind of vague stuff. And then there's the more pre-ictal, being sick just before a seizure, and sort of nodding and head twitching and what have you. But quite a few prodromal, actually, and one which not really sure if there's any signs, but the seizures are upon waking, so obviously quite difficult then to tell. But yeah, quite a few people noticing those really subtle signs as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Yeah, good monitoring. Good.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I grouped those just together. So for the actual seizure phase, for the ictal phase, we divide seizures up into two categories. One is a generalized seizure, and the other one is a focal seizure. Now, the generalized one is usually the ones that everyone will recognize. They look quite violent. They usually, what we say is that they include the whole brain, the whole hemispheres. When we have a focal one, it's restricted to one area of the brain, so it doesn't go into a generalized one, but it can go as well. So just to go to the kind of classical one, you also sometimes hear the term grand mal, or generalized tonic-clonic. So that means that the whole body is affected, and also the whole cerebral cortex is affected as well. So what we see is rhythmic jerking. We can see stiffness without the jerking. So some dogs don't actually do the paddling, but they're just very stiff. We can see it alternating. We can also have a little bit of different types of seizures that involve the whole brain. So one of it is a myoclonus, so that's really a short, abrupt movement. And the other one is an absent seizure, where they just don't really connect with you. Also, what is important is that the seizures may also change over time. So that doesn't mean that your dog is progressing or there is a red flag, but sometimes we do see a little bit of changes in the seizure appearance. Now, with regards to seizure monitoring, it's important that we know how things look like. So we do have some videos to show you now in which we see seizures. So if you don't want to look at the moment, then feel free just to look away or to tune out. It's completely fine. But yeah, for really to know what we're monitoring, we do have some videos to help us. So this is a very classical video on a seizure in a dog. So this is generalized clonic-tonic seizure, and we can see really this paddling and the rigid limbs. We can see that the dog is not communicated with the owner. We can see the clenching of the jaw as well. So this is a very hallmark generalized tonic-clonic seizure, and I think this is probably the seizure type that most people are seeing in their pet as well. So now you can see that the dog is slowly recovering. The paddling is stopped. We do see kind of this heavy panting still. The dog is not completely with it, but it's not showing the classical signs anymore. And then after this dog, there's another little dog as well. We'll just wait for a little bit. Now it's slowly coming around. So this dog starts off with a focal and then goes into a generalized one. So you can see it's kind of staring into space. Now we can't really see what it's doing, but as the dog is kind of moving its head, we can see that it's kind of jerking a little bit. The mouth is clenched, and now it's getting towards getting a bit stiff, and slowly the whole body is getting involved as well. So the first one was already a generalized seizure, and this one is a focal going into a generalized one. You can see, unfortunately, the poor dog falling down now. So we have limb rigidity, we have jerking, we have involvement of all four limbs, and we have loss of consciousness. I would say this video is probably one of the most severe ones from the videos that we're having. And jaw clenching. So this is a hallmark generalized tonic-clonic seizure. Now, this is a dog that has a little bit of a difference. So we know that this dog has generalized tonic-clonic seizures, but here the dog seems quite absent. Doesn't seem completely with it, has his eyes closed. So we can see an abnormal mentation kind of spaced out, and we know that this dog has epilepsy as well. So this is an absent seizure. And if we put, for example, an EEG on the dog's head, so the little pads where we can monitor the brain waves, we'd probably see that as well. This is little cat, and what we see is that the cat's very spaced out. We can see some dilated pupils as well. And we can see that the cat is salivating a lot, and that is quite hallmark for seizure activity. So we see hypersalivating, dilated pupils, and abnormal mentation. So again, this is a sort of an absent seizure. Now, this is a little cavy, and we can see that if we look at the head, occasionally has a little head bob and a little kind of abrupt jerks right there. So we can see that the mentation is not completely normal, but there's little jerkings going on. So this is a type of a myoclonic seizure. So in these cases, they're all seizures. So they're all important for us to note as well. So that was it for the generalized one. If we go to focal seizures, or where they're only involving part of the brain, another word that we quite often use or used in the past is petit mal. So it starts in one area of the brain. The signs may be a bit more subtle. And we divide them up into three categories. So the first one is motor, which is the more common one, which we see facial twitching, for example, or twitching of the ear. Sometimes we see this as well when they go into a generalized one. Autonomic signs is sometimes when we only see dilated pupils, we only see hypersalivation. So it looks a little bit like the cat that we see before. And behavior ones, they can be anything. They can be aggressive behavior, they can be anxious behavior. So that can be a really difficult one to really pinpoint that it's a seizure, especially because we also see behavioral changes with epilepsy. So for example, this is a dog. This dog, we see that there's clenching of the jaw. So if this dog was recumbent, this would look exactly the same as the first dog with the generalized one. However, this dog doesn't lose consciousness. It stays conscious throughout his seizure. So we have repeated head movements, we have jaw clenching, and we have intact consciousness. So we can say that this is a motor focal seizure. Then this little dog that also has generalized seizures, and we can see that it's biting the air. So this is fly catching, and this is something that we sometimes also see with epilepsy, is that dog starts to have these behaviors as fly catching. It can be behavioral, but it can be seizure activity as well. So if you do see this, also good to monitor that. Now, there's loads of seizure mimics out there as well that can look like a seizure, and especially if we're not experienced, they can look very, very similar. And I've just listed here the most common ones, and the ones that are in bold are the ones that we see the most as being confused with them. So syncope is when we, for example, have a collapse from most common ones would be from the heart if we have a heart condition. Usually they don't paddle, they're just quite flaccid. Narcolepsy is very rare, but it's a condition where a dog, or we see also in people, just immediately falls asleep. and then wakes up again. So we see that in dogs as well. It's quite remarkable, but there's no paddling involved. Then vestibular attacks can look quite similar because we have all of the sudden balance problems. Which we can have dogs that keep rolling or cats that keep rolling, and they, because they lose their balance, they also paddle a lot. Compulsive disorders and pain associated behavior. We see that occasionally. An idiopathic head tremor is quite specific, and I'll show you an image of that as well. And movement disorder is the last one that probably is the most common one that are confused by seizures or mixed up with seizures. So movement disorders is quite a new condition in pets that we've recently discovered more and more about. So I'll just go through a few of them with you. This on the right side you can forget, but these are some things that we as vets look out for to try to differentiate them. So these are all not epilepsy. So this is an example of a dog with really kind of this rhythmic head jerking, which looks quite distressful and looks quite severe. Now we can see uncontrolled side-to-side movements. The dog is still alert and responsive, and if you would throw a ball at the dog, it would stop these movements. So this is quite hallmark for a head tremor, and very, very often this is a benign condition, meaning that there's nothing, there's no badness underneath, and they tend to just have a good quality of life in between their episodes. So that's a long name for it. So this is not epilepsy. This is a condition that we see quite often. Just show you the other video as well. So on the right side, we can see that the dog is trying to get up. And what we see is that all four limbs are involved, but the dog is still conscious, that we have this persistent muscle stiffness. So you can see that the dog's limbs are extended, and sometimes we have also vomiting or lip smacking as well. So these images are very hallmark for what we call a movement disorder, and we'll get to the difference with epilepsy. So it is not epilepsy. So again, this is a little staffy with the same condition. So this dog is sort of able to walk. So we can see that the movements are quite uncontrolled. The animal is trying to walk and really wants to walk, but is not able to really regulate the movements. And you can see that the mentation is quite intact. Right? So the main difference that we see is that all four limbs are involved, the whole body is involved, but the animal is still conscious or still able to recognize you and try to kind of connect with you. Whereas in seizures, we see that that's not the case. Then the last one, this is when we have what we discussed with the rolling. So you see that this dog doesn't have rigid limbs. It's just going really from left to right, and it's kind of rolling over. And this is quite hallmark for kind of a vestibular attack. So head swaying, rolling. Sometimes we have eye movement as well. So again, this is not epilepsy, but this is a vestibular attack. So the main kind of differences is that consciousness, again, with a vestibular episode is usually maintained, and we can really have this kind of balance issue rather than rapid movements or stiffness or jerking. Now, what do we record? So kind of the things that we mentioned before. So the duration, the vigorousness of the episode, if there's any vomiting, diarrhea, urination, salivation, if you needed to use any emergency drugs, I would definitely record that as well, and what the response to that is as well. So when we monitor a generalized seizure or another type of seizure, what is important to know is when does it start and when does it stop? And although we as vets quite often just assume that you can read our minds or it's not always the case. And sometimes it can be quite difficult to know when a seizure starts and stops as well. But kind of in a nutshell, a seizure will start when we see the involuntary movements. So when we see the paddling, when we see the stiffness. When does it stop? Is when this stops. So when they stop paddling, when they stop having this jerking movement, when their consciousness slowly returns, that's when then we stop the recording. And sometimes what happens is that we record a little bit too long if we include the postictal phase, and that's a bit worrying because that means that the seizure is actually not as long as we thought. So example, let's say your dog stares into space at 5 past 2 and then starts twitching and falls over. That's when you start recording. Then the jerking stops about 3 minutes later. That's when you stop recording, and then you can record the postictal phase as well. So in terms of seizure logs, everyone is a bit different in that and what they prefer. But whatever works for you would be my advice. Some people like Excel sheets, some people like just to write it down. Some people may know the RVC app where you can log your seizures. Whatever works for you. So let's see if this one works now. Pauline, can you help me?
Yes, I'm on standby.
I think
Oh,
I just didn't click on this one now.
hang on, I missed it there. Can you put it back up?
Yeah, I'll put it
Yeah,
back for a sec.
yeah, there we go. And yes,
All right,
all good.
there we go.
Just while we're waiting, I
Mm-hmm.
see a couple of people saying this confuses us. It's Archie paddles and jerks, and then the largest part of him is lying motionless and unconscious before he jumps back to life. So they are having
Yeah,
difficulty kind of deciding what is seizure. Somebody actually said that their dog has a movement disorder, which then turns to seizure, which we actually spoke about the other day.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
so
yeah,
like a couple of things going on there.
yeah. I would, for the people that have the episodes where they lie kind of still for quite a long time, that's already the seizure has stopped.
Yeah.
So it's really that period is the time in the postictal phase where they're starting to come round.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, a
And
couple of people's asking if you can pop the code back on. They've
yeah,
missed.
yeah, perfect. Yeah. And yeah, we had this chat a little bit before, is that in some dogs we do see seizures, epileptic seizures and movement disorders. They're both kind of similar abnormality with ion channels. They're different etiologies, but still. And we see this in people as well. There's just not a lot known at the moment, and it's quite difficult to prove it as well, given that we don't routinely put the EEG on the head, the little pads where we monitor the brain waves. So yeah, definitely room in the future to further investigate that. Okay, shall I go through to the answers, see what we have so
Yeah.
far? No one has an Excel sheet. The RVC tracker is still quite popular.
Well, it's not coming up on our screen with the percentage, but I don't know if you can see it, but it's not
I can
showing.
see it here, yes. You
All
can.
right, it's not coming up for us, so we'll just have to take your word for
Oh,
it.
that. Okay, I think this is the last time we use the poll. So we have Word document 13%, and then we have our VC epilepsy tracker is 38%. So that's the main one, that's the winner. Then we have a written diary 13%, online seizure template is 13%, and other is 25. So I don't know if the people that put other want to comment on what they like to use.
I see Craig says he logs it in his diary, although he's interested in the RVC app. And the good thing with the RVC app is that you can export your kind of month by month or week by week. So it's actually quite good for obviously sending it onto your vet and what have you. You can get graphs and things like that and look at patterns. So it's actually quite useful for that.
Yeah.
So Liz says, should I only be timing the paddling phase and not the unconscious part, which is usually the longest part? So I'm assuming the unconscious part, do you mean, Liz, at the end of the paddling?
Yeah, I suspect so.
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
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 So I would record both. So the just the paddling itself, and then once he stops, that's when the unconscious part. That's when the seizure kind of the seizure is stops and goes into the postictal phase. So I would definitely record both, but the actual seizure is probably only the paddling bit.
Yeah. And some people just using a notebook and what have you.
Yeah. Okay. Then this is what we already mentioned, start and end the timing of the seizure. Um, See if you can make a video again for diagnosis, but also just for follow up in terms of, okay, how does the seizures look like? The unconscious phase, how long that look like? So for the unconscious phase, what we do quite often see is when they are completely out, but the paddling has stopped. That phase, I agree with you guys. That is quite difficult to say when is it now a seizure and when is it not a seizure. So I would stop recording, as I said, when the paddling is stopped. If that unconscious phase does take a while, just report that to your vet. Normally it shouldn't take more than just a few minutes. And then the hallmark postictal phase is when we see the wobbliness and the hungriness, etc. Yeah, but I would definitely record both of that. Also record if you have to give rescue medication, yes or no. Then with regards to monitoring systems, we have then the RVC is a very common one. And then at Glasgow, we also use the VCreate, is where we upload videos and where you can have a whole diary with videos of your pet. It's also useful if we have any behavior abnormalities that we're not quite sure about. You can upload it there as well, and then we can have a look to see whether we think that's seizure activity or whether we think that's post-ictal-like behavior or whether we think that's just abnormal behavior in between their seizures. And that can be linked to, for example, medication side effects. That can be linked to primary behavioral issues as well. So monitoring the ictal phase. Why is this helpful? Well, because of the diagnosis, of course, that we went through, to be a bit more objective on how long the seizure lasts, because if we don't record, then often it can last for weeks in our heads. Sometimes we can see triggers, and sometimes we can have also emergency patterns as well. So when is it emergency? That differs as well a little bit per animal. So in general, a seizure itself is not necessarily an emergency unless it's the first one or unless there's abnormalities associated with it. So if your dog is known with epilepsy and it has a seizure, make sure that they're to stay calm, time the seizure, keep your pet safe. So make sure the environment is and there's no direct hazards there. Keep the airways clean. Don't put anything in their mouths, of course. But if they're potentially in harm, then you can move them, of course. Stay with your pet once they're fully recovered. So normally say about an hour, at least 2 hours after, and then also record it in your diary. And then with regards to rescue medication, that is in consultation with your vet. That is a bit different sometimes for the individual patient, and it depends on how they respond to the rescue medication as well. And there's some studies done, and we see that actually not a lot of people use rescue medication, and more people make sure that the environment is dark and their pet is safe, and they feel that is more effective than rescue medication. But feel free to share your experience with that.
Liz says she finds her dog's recovery is worse if she gives diazepam during a seizure, which is interesting.
Yeah. And in terms of that the dog is more flat after, or?
Not sure.
Yeah, no worries. Sometimes we see it when the seizures last really short and we give
Uh,
emergency treatment that
yeah, she just more anxious and pants a lot.
yeah,
And somebody says they only use rescue medication when there's 3 or more seizures. Um, somebody asking about, somebody mentioning about the tongue and saying that's quite a relief to know that they can't swallow the tongue, but why do they go blue? I'm assuming
yeah.
the tongue blue.
Yeah, there's a bit of reduced oxygen going to the brain during a seizure, so we do see sometimes a bit of discoloration of the tongue.
Yeah, and so some people saying, yep, diazepam helps the clusters.
Yeah,
Somebody else uses rectal diazepam straight away.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So that's really on the individual patient. Some dogs respond really well to it. Some dogs, unfortunately, their seizures are so short that the side effects are actually making it worse. But also depends on how many seizures a dog has per episode. If dogs have clusters or cats have clusters, we tend to be a little bit more aggressive with rescue medication as well. When it is a seizure, normally we say when they have a loss of conscious longer than 5 minutes, and they don't respond to the rescue medication, when they have repeated seizures with no full recovery in between them, when they have more than, and that also depends on your dog. For some dogs with a known cluster and pattern of, for example, 2 seizures, we tend to say, well, if they have 3, which is unusual, then give us a ring, and here's your seizure plan. But it really depends on the dog. And what most of the time when they're newly diagnosed, it's more than 1 seizure within 24 hours. That's kind of the hallmark that we always say. If they have clusters, call us. But obviously, if you are in close contact with your vet and they have given you instructions that you're comfortable with, then that's fine. Difficulty breathing after a seizure and serious injury during a seizure as well. So again, yeah, if it's more than 1, make sure that you've discussed that with your vet. Are there any remarks in the chat box that people have
um,
questions or different ideas about?
just somebody said, yeah, they give rescue meds when seizures over 3 minutes, and the dog comes round quicker after that. And
Yeah,
without the rescue meds, she actually takes hours to come back to normal. So the rescue meds seem to be helping recovery as well. So the postictal phase obviously is much less intense as well, and their dog sort of tolerates. Yeah, so
yeah, perfect. So yeah, what we discussed, that every dog is a bit different in that. Yeah. Then the postictal phase, what we normally see is this poor dog just had a seizure. So we can see that it is very wobbly. It's trying to stay upright. It's conscious though. It's so disorientation, ataxia. Those are the most common ones. Sometimes pacing or compulsive walking. Blindness is not very common, but definitely one to look out for. Lethargy, restlessness, increased thirst or hunger is one that we quite often see. Sometimes they can vocalize, and sensory deficits as well. So there's a few papers on postictal phase. As you can see here, disorientation, compulsive walking, and ataxia were the most common ones. They are usually always seen. So if a dog or a cat doesn't have a postictal phase after a big seizure, then it's really important that we see that we have a good description or we see that video, just to make sure that we're actually on the right diagnose, because postictal phase is a very common thing to see. If we do see it, or when we see it, it's usually it usually lasts for about 30 minutes. So that's quite a common cutoff. It can be longer as well, and there have been reports up to 2 weeks. Now that's quite severe, but yeah, usually about 30 minutes is quite routine. Then what I was interested, because that's something that we are not always aware of, but is there something that you do in particular that really helps your dog recover after a seizure? We talked about medication. so rescue drugs for anything else. There's
Mm.
loads of things that I've heard before. Ocular compressions, ice cream is the one that comes up really commonly.
Yeah, ice cream's the first one on the list. Sleeping, resting. Somebody says ice cubes. Um, we did have a question or a comment here to say after a seizure, we've noticed the dog gets very hungry. Does this have something to do with the sugar levels dropping or other changes taking place? And is this normal? And I know from my experience that hunger after seizures definitely normal for my dog. And somebody else said that yes, they tried to eat everything. So that was certainly my experience, and that actually helped to settle my dog down. She was starving after seizures, and so she would eat. So again, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
uh,
no, it's a very common hunger or thirst, and dogs quite often go to their bowl directly to see what kind of food there is. There's a good
yeah.
question why that is. I don't think we know exactly why that is. I can have a look in the human literature, but I don't think hunger is that often reported, more
Mm.
specific to dogs. But that's a good question. I'll look into that. But there's
Funnily
definitely
enough,
a very normal thing to see, yeah,
mm,
increased hunger.
funnily enough, most of what people are putting down here to say that helps them to recover is food of some sort. So that seems to be the common thread that the dogs are wanting to eat after.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess apart from wanting to eat, it's also a sort of a comfort, isn't it? Food,
Yeah,
something
yeah.
recognizable, something enjoyable, something that would kind of keep us nice and relaxed, I guess. Yeah. So what do we record in the postictal phase? So basically the signs that you're seeing, how long it takes, and also if you notice any blindness or aggression. Now, those two signs are not very common, but if we do see that, we're usually a little bit more aggressive with seizure medication. Blindness is not common, but very occasionally we can see that it lasts for quite a long time, and that's a bit of a concern with regards to, of course, quality of life of your pet. Aggression obviously is something that we definitely don't want to see. So yeah, monitor for that as well. But luckily we don't come across that very often.
Mm.
So why is this helpful? To differentiate seizure types and severity. Quite often, postictal phase, kind of how severe it is or how long it is, it does correlate with the actual seizure itself. So sometimes we see that the seizures gradually change and the postictal phase associated with that as well. So it's good for us to monitor if there's a progression, yes or no. Improves our seizure management. Sometimes it's just the postictal phase that improves with the seizures, but we see that postictal phase has an impact on quality of life. So even if unfortunately we're not able to treat the seizures as much as we want to, sometimes we do really help the animal and the owner with improving the postictal phase. Sometimes we can identify patterns as well. We've already discussed that. Perfect. Are there any more answers?
There's a couple of people who say that their dog does experience blindness or has experienced blindness for maybe up to an hour afterwards.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a couple in there. It's something that happened with my dog when she was first hospitalized, but her blindness lasted about a week. But she was very, very severe. And yeah, but after that, not quite so much. But there is a couple here, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And blindness, when we do see it, it usually does recover quite quickly. It's just
Mm.
when we see that the rest of the signs recover and the blindness only remains, then we're starting to worry a little bit. But yeah, blindness or reduced vision, especially when they're wobbly, that together, yeah, it's definitely what we see in the postictal phase as well. But yeah, monitor that. Seizure trackers. So there's a few trackers out there that you could potentially use to monitor your dog's seizures. Um, I would say they're sometimes advertised to be useful. They're not very well underbuilt with research papers. So we're definitely getting there, and it can be helpful, especially when we monitor, for example, activity levels, but they don't actually track the actual seizures. So we're not quite there yet with seizure trackers, but there's a few out there, such as Pet Pace or something like FitBark, that can help you sometimes with identifying patterns. But there's no kind of product out there that will reliably track your seizures. So if you have any, or you say, oh, this is the one that really helped me, feel free to share it with us.
Somebody mentioned earlier that they use the pet camera in the house to record the seizures as well. So I guess that's another way of monitoring it when you're not about, other than the seizure trackers. But they use it to actually time the seizures so that they can watch it back.
Yeah.
So that's another way of doing it, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. And for the cameras, I think we discussed that previously as well, shortly, is that for cameras, so for some people this really works and gives it also the possibility for you to be in a different room than your pets, because sometimes it can be quite intense for your pet to be constantly with you. Not saying that's a bad thing, but sometimes if you want to, for example, train them to be or to be in a different room, etc., a camera can be definitely a good outcome for that. For some people, it makes them more anxious, so it increase that anxiety. So if that's you, then a camera might not be the best option, because sometimes, and this is very normal of behavior as well, is that we become a little bit quite invested in looking at that camera. So I would say whatever works for you. A camera can be really useful. There's a Furbo out there that kind of tracks the movement of your animal and then records them as well. So that could be a good option as well for people that want to do a little bit more with the monitoring by a camera.
Yeah, a few people saying that they do that in baby monitors. Somebody saying that it just made her anxiety levels really high when she
Yeah.
was away. And yeah, I kind of fell into that group, I think, because, what can you do if you see something kind of thing. So yeah, it's really individual, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. And what works for someone else might not work for you. And once if you're conscious of that, then you can decide for yourself if that's helpful, yes or no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lifestyle changes. Is there anything in the house that you've changed since your pet was diagnosed?
For me, it was lots of baby gates because I had a dog that would attack my epileptic dog. So I don't know if people in multi-dog households have had to change anything, but somebody says they stopped using plugins, no air fresheners, no smells. They seem to be a trigger. My other half sleeping on the sofa. Yeah, the dog now sleeps with them instead of in the kitchen. Yeah, so a lot of people taking their dogs to sleep beside
Yeah.
them, and a lot of people concerned about fragrances, air fresheners, candles, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Seems to be the general thread. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of that, yeah, potential trigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think everybody's kind of moved their dog with them, or they've moved their partner to the couch, one of the two.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite common. And Sam will talk a tiny bit about that as well. But yeah, we see that very a lot in the seizure clinic, is that people increase their kind of monitoring on their pet by being more with them. Yeah. Then what we see in people, what they tend to do or what they tend to recommend is a balanced diet. So food is very important. And then we talked about before about the ketogenic diet and MCT oil as well, about exercise. So routine exercise is advised in people. Stress seems to be one of the main triggers in people. So really stress management, yoga, We also have quite a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy in people with epilepsy. So that's a very common thing that we do. And then sleep is also very, very important in people with epilepsy. And now we're going to listen to Sam, and she's going to talk a little bit about behavioral changes or lifestyle changes in dogs with epilepsy and cats.
Hello, good evening. My name is Samantha Lindley. I'm a veterinary surgeon and I've been dealing with behaviour problems and clinical causes of behaviour problems for about 30 years. I'm going to give you a brief talk this evening just about the link between behaviour and epilepsy. I won't be able to give you any direct answers for your own individual pet, but a brief overview of the subject. So I'm just going to share the presentation with you. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I'm lecturing elsewhere at the moment. So there is a growing amount of evidence now that epilepsy and an increase in unwanted behavioural signs are linked, as both in humans and in animals. What kind of behaviour changes do we see? So we may see fear and anxiety. That's the most common kind of behaviour, fear about being approached by other dogs or people. A defensive aggression. So for instance, if you continue to approach this dog hiding, it may become snappy, aggressive, grumpy, and we would call that defensive aggression. And abnormal perceptions. This might be something you recognise. So staring into space, apparently barking at nothing in particular, looking a bit vacant. Those kind of things we might put under the label of abnormal perception. We need to be careful about making the jump between knowing that our patient, your pet, has epilepsy and assuming that any behaviours are linked to it. It is of course possible that those behaviours may have developed anyway, but they may be linked to the seizures. They may equally be linked to the medication caused for the seizures. It's also possible that the change in your caregiving for your pet has also helped to trigger some of those changes in behaviour. So when you're looking, as you do intently at your pet, when they've developed seizures and you're looking for all the signs and all the patterns that might help you, try as far as possible to observe and be as objective as you can be. You can't be completely objective. This is your pet that we're talking about. But if you can think in terms of when the behaviour really started, you'll notice the big emotional things in our lives. When you moved house, when a baby arrived, when the seizures started, when the medication started. So we tend to make links in our brains and see patterns that aren't always there. So try to think and talk to other members of the family if they're there and say, did they really start at this time? So that those of us trying to assess what's going on can help as much as possible and not be led into thinking it really is all about the seizures. Won't surprise anybody to know that in the studies, stress appears to be the main emotional factor. So epilepsy resulting in stress kind of behaviours, but stress possibly also contributing to some epileptic events. Is there anything you can do to help? First of all, you would consult a behaviourist, who that would be a matter of who your vet would recommend. So we want to try and work out whether it's a normal development of an unwanted behaviour that's going to happen anyway, regardless of whether your pet developed epilepsy, whether it's genuinely associated with seizure, whether it's associated with a medication, an increase in dose in the medication, the addition of a second medication or third medication or fourth medication. Could it be behaviour that's caused by other clinical causes? You'd be very focused on the seizures. They're big, you can see them, you observe them, they concern you, but other clinical causes that may not be related to the seizures could also be causing the unwanted behaviour. And then a final layer is those behaviours caused by other clinical causes that are made worse by seizures or medication. So on their own, there may be something wrong with your pet that causes a mild change in behaviour and it's not a big deal. But once you then combine that with the seizures, it may become significant. I'll mention that again later. So what can we do as behaviourists? We look at trying to make life predictable, because that reduces stress. That doesn't mean you have to do the same thing all the time. When you set up a routine like that, you set yourself up to fail. But we look at how we manage our pets so that they know that they will get everything they need from you. That reduces their stress. If we know that certain stressful events trigger seizures or trigger an increase in anxiety, then we look at trigger reduction, which is through a form of behavior modification we call desensitization, sometimes things we call counter conditioning. Looking at your nighttime routine, sometimes that changes when you have a pet with epilepsy. You take the dog quite often into your room because you're concerned they're going to have a seizure and you're not able to witness it or help them. And that's fine. There's no particular reason why you shouldn't do that, except for some dogs that will change their perception and their attachment to you. They may become over-attached to you because they're spending so much time with you. Some of them may change the way they regard you in terms of doing as they're told, obedience. So that might be worth considering. That could change their behavior without it being directly linked to the seizures. So for some animals, it may be better to use a monitor, like a baby monitor, rather than having them in the room. Also, you have to remember that if your nighttime routine is disturbed, the patient is disturbed. If you don't get enough sleep, that contributes to stress and anxiety and not being able to cope. So if you yourself are disturbed at night, it may again be better to have the patient out of the room. We shouldn't be using physical punishment or shouting at our pets. I know sometimes one gets exasperated, but punishments, particularly if it's unpredictable, particularly if it causes fear, is going to exacerbate stress. So we need to look at other ways of showing our pets that certain behaviours are inappropriate. May have multiple animal household, cats and dogs, dogs and dogs, cats and cats. And most of the time they may get on fine, but like other siblings, like human siblings, there can be antagonisms over high value objects, over you, the owner, over food, and that can lead to increase of stress. So sometimes looking at those relationships and trying to make those as positive as possible can be helpful in terms of reducing stress. We all need a space to escape. If you have a very busy household, children coming in and out, teenagers in and out, people on shift work, and the dog particularly, equally the cat, isn't allowed to get any rest, that will all can't escape from trying to work out what's going on or control what's going on depending on their breed. That can be very stressful for them. So having a den, a place to escape, where they have the choice to go. Sometimes they need a little guidance with it, not somewhere to lock them in, but somewhere where they can go. And the rule to be, nobody disturbs them when they're there. If you need to get them out, then you have a strategy for getting them out, but you don't go to the den and disturb them. We don't want to make life really boring, but some seizures can be triggered by extremes of emotional highs and arousal. So we tend to wind our animals up and excited because it's lovely to see them looking excited. So maybe keeping things a little lower key, limiting the extremes of emotional highs and lows may be helpful. Very impressive to see a beagle. They're very food orientated, to see it restraining its impulse to eat that bowl of food. So impulse control again can help teach our pets that they can't get everything exactly when they want it. We'll do those lessons probably exactly when they want it, and that will reduce stress. I know I will get this food at some point when my owner tells me I can get it. I don't have to react to my impulses all the time, because if you try and do that, you are likely to be frustrated. That increases stress. Pain is the most common medical cause of behaviour problems. 70 to 82% of referred behaviour cases are caused by pain, so exacerbated by pain. So that may be one of those underlying causes that occurs alongside seizures, and contributes to the behavior changes you see. It may just be coincidence that the two things happen together, but some seizures are very violent. And if your dog, for example, has an underlying pain problem, many of them do, and they just run about and carry on as though nothing's happened, and you get a violent seizure, then that can wind that pain up. That pain then starts to display itself as behavioral changes, and you can see how it'd be very easy to blame those behavioral changes on the seizures directly. So it takes somebody who can palpate chronic pain in order to find that may be the cause. Lots these days about the gut, about the bugs in the gut that we call the microbiome, and the influence of diet. We know that there's a link between the gut and the brain and stress, and that those things are linked. So having the ideal diet for your particular individual animal, so looking at how their stools are, whether they vomit, whether they're particularly flatulent, making sure their diet is as optimum as possible can help to make them feel as well as possible and reduce stress and indeed inflammation. Dogs particularly pick up on what we feel. Cats do as well. They just potentially care a bit less. Dogs will, some of them are very sensitive to what we feel and will mirror our stress, anxiety, and emotions. So whilst it's understandable that you're very concerned about your pet with epilepsy, try to do whatever you do to reduce your own stress, and that will help your pet as well. And finally, I'm going to give you a technique to use, which is a relaxation technique that you can use on your dog. Eventually works on cats, but we're focusing mainly on dogs. This is developed from a number of different areas, but mainly we know that when you pet your dog, when you stroke your dog in a way that makes them go all gooey and relaxed, that we are reducing their blood pressure and releasing lots of lovely mood neurotransmitters. That happens in the dog and it happens in you. And it's most effective when you do it to your own dog, because that's when we get the hormones oxytocin and prolactin. So we can condition this response. We can train dogs to relax on command. A conditioning response is a relatively simple response that we all develop. You do it if you've learned to drive, you've developed conditioned responses. As soon as you see a red light when you're sitting in the driving seat, your right foot moves towards the brake pedal, at least I hope it does. You can override that, but most of the time you're not even conscious of it. That's a conditioned response because of practicing that link between the red light and moving your right foot. That's a simple conditioned response, and that's what this is that I'm going to describe. So most dogs have areas that they really like to be stroked. Find it if you don't know it, so that they go all gooey. You don't want them getting wound up and excited. You start in a calm situation, not the same time, not the same place. You want this to be portable, but a calm situation. You give them a cue word. It's a new word, not one you use in any other context. It might be relax, calm, peace, whatever you want to use. You give that word, and then you immediately start stroking them so that they go all gooey and relaxed. You can continue repeating that word. You certainly don't have another conversation. You focus on the dog. You don't have to repeat it, but you can. That's the only word you would say during the process. When you've done that for a few days, for some dogs it might take a week, for others it'll be 2 days, or two times. You say the word and you'll see them relax before you've even touched them. They are now conditioned to that word. So when they're in that position, you repeat it for a bit, and then you can move up to a slightly more stimulating situation, slightly more aroused. And you keep repeating that so that eventually you could get them relaxing on command outside in the garden, out on a walk. And that then becomes a really useful technique that if you know they're just getting anxious or upset, you can use that technique to bring down their arousal. If you know that anxiety is linked to seizure activity, then obviously it'd be even more imperative to use that technique. I am not saying this will stop your dog having seizures, obviously, but it might start to improve the situation and make you feel more in control of what's going on. certainly in people when they do cognitive behavior therapy and yoga and breathing techniques, this seems to help in terms, in some cases, of frequency and severity of seizure activity. It's worth a try. It's a nice thing to do. It's a positive thing to do. Some dogs won't let you do it. They will just keep walking away. Don't get frustrated. There are reasons why that happens. Simply spending time with them, tickling their tummy 1 to 2 times per second is a nice, relaxing pace. Tends to give optimum release of the neurotransmitters so that they are as relaxed as possible, as often as possible. Try to do it on your terms rather than theirs, because they can become rather demanding. So if you spend a couple of times a day just getting them into a relaxed state, that can be helpful. After all, if somebody did that to us a couple of times a day, we would probably think life was a little bit less stressful than we might currently do. So that was a relatively quick gallop through the link between epilepsy and behavioural changes. So remember, sometimes the epilepsy may be causing the behavioural changes. The behaviour may connect to the epilepsy. But of course, the behaviour may be separate from epilepsy and just getting confused in the whole picture. You need somebody to help tease that out for you. Your neurologist may be able to help you, and they may be able to put you in touch with somebody who can also help you in terms of working out where the behaviours lie in the context of your pet's epilepsy. So I hope that's been helpful and that you enjoy the rest of the evening.
Great. Thank you, Sam, but unfortunately she can't be here tonight. I hope that was useful to you guys. If you have any other input, feel free to share. I didn't put in all the literature, but if you wanted to monitor your pet's behavior, so behavior and cognition, on our website, we do have some handouts that can help you. So you can find them under EpiVet. And there's a tool for both behavior and cognition that you can use, and you can score your own pet. And then what the aim is that we score this over time. So we see over time if there's any changes, yes or no. And if there are, you can go with that to your vet and explain them, hey, this is what's going on. Should we do anything about this? So that's the behavior, and this is the one for cognition, just for you to use. Then what to record for the postictal phase, sorry, for the interictal behaviors and cognition, that is on the right side of the screen. So signs of fear, anxiety, aggression, trainability and attention, social behaviors, activity levels. For cognition, we have disorientation or house soiling, sleep-wake cycle, activity levels, and learning and memory. So those are the kind of things that you can look out for. Then we're at the end of the presentation. So with regards to kind of takeaways, again, what I mentioned before, having a bit of anxiety is completely normal, and it's what we feel in our daily lives with loads of things. And epilepsy is one of these things that is unpredictable and uncontrollable. So it's a very normal feeling to have. Video record your pet's episodes if you haven't done that before, just for your vet to look and to ensure that we're on the right diagnose. See if you can try to identify the 4 phases of a seizure and record them. Monitor their behavior as well, and also keep a seizure and a behavioral diary at the same time. And if you are interested in a behavioral specialist, then feel free to reach out to them. Don't feel like you should use that as a kind of a last resort. So that's it for today. I don't know, Pauline, if you've seen anything in the chat box that we need to.
Yeah, just a couple of questions that came up. Somebody asked, will epilepsy stop? And I guess they mean, can your dog recover from it? Will the seizure stop? So I'll let you kind of sort of answer that one.
Yeah, it's kind of like when epilepsy goes into remission, and it's definitely possible. There's some dogs out there and cats out there that go into remission. I wouldn't say it's common. So most of our pets, they do tend to have more seizures throughout life. What we see very often is a one-off seizure. So epilepsy, we normally define that if they have more than one unprovoked seizure with a gap of at least 24 hours. So a seizure on the Monday and a seizure a few weeks later, or months later, or even year later, we could call it epilepsy. But if it's just a one-off, we don't always tend to call it epilepsy. So that's what we see quite commonly throughout a life, that a dog has a seizure and then and never has a seizure again. So if it's very, very infrequent, those cases are more prone to go into remission, or we don't see it back. But if they have more frequent seizures, then very often we see that they do come back, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then, Vicky, there's a couple of sort of similar questions here. Somebody asking, what is the definition of an optimum diet? And I guess that is an individual thing for each dog as well. And somebody asking if they should use probiotics.
Yeah, yeah, those are good questions, and unfortunately, I can't really answer you
Yeah.
that because we don't have enough research on that. But there's a group of people, and one of a very well-known veterinary neurologist called Dr. Holger Volk. He is more involved in kind of the dietary side of managing epilepsy, and he's looking into probiotics and looking in, for example, hypoallergenic diet. So that's a diet where the food that is cut really, really small, so really kind of the enzymes are really small that the body doesn't recognize the food as such. So that's a hypoallergenic diet, and he's also looking if that maybe helps. So far, we don't really have any kind of major data or really indications that it helps, but it's definitely something that we're looking into. And with regards to diets, so in people we know a lot about diets, and we know a lot about epilepsy classifications and which type of epilepsy would work for which type of diet would work for which type of epilepsy. In dogs, we're very, very much at the beginning stage of this. So we all still group all of these epilepsy together as just epilepsy. So with diets, unfortunately, we're not very far in that, apart from the MCT oil. That's the one that we do have some evidence for.
Yeah, and on that, somebody's asking about thoughts on CBD oil. Their dog had 17 seizures in March, and they almost lost him, already on Keppra and Pheno, but they'd been reading about CBD oil and wondering about trying that as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think we briefly covered CBD oil, yeah, during
Yeah.
alternative management strategies. Yeah, CBD oil is a tricky one. So CBD oils is a medication. So legally, we shouldn't buy it ourselves. So it should be prescribed by a vet. Also because we need to know about the doses. There can be side effects, and there also can be adverse effects as well. So long term, we can see liver changes with CBD oil. So it's not just a supplement that is harmless. There's some evidence that it may work, but it's not the first line treatment that we use. So we normally tend to go for treatments that we know a little bit about their behavior. There's loads of research done. We know very well what the side effects are and the efficacy. So the efficacy is very important. So we tend to go for other drugs first, but CBD oil is an option in some dogs, but it's a question based on an individual case, which means that I would have to really look into your pet's kind of history, etc. So I'm afraid that we're not being able to discuss that tonight. So I don't know, Pauline, if there are other kind of specific questions to people's pets.
Yeah, this one's
Unfortunately,
quite interesting actually.
yeah.
Just somebody asking, is there any recent breakthroughs with human epilepsy that may eventually filter to pet care?
Yeah, so in people, we are looking more at the genetics and see if we can treat that. In dogs, unfortunately, we're looking more at the phenotype. We don't know a lot about genetics, so trying to change that. One of the trials that we're doing in Glasgow is injecting mRNA in the CSF of dogs, and that is something that we are doing because we'd like to do it for our pets and see if it helps for our pets. But the human hospital is involved with the research because actually they would like to use it for people. So that's one of the things that they're looking at. And in people, people, we tend to do quite a lot with diets. We also tend to go more for surgery. So people with refractory epilepsy, so meaning that they are not responding well to the medication, they go through a pre-surgical evaluation. So there are some more options available in people compared to dogs. Right?
Yeah, and I think that about covers it. Yeah, I think we've kind of covered everything in the chat box so far.
Perfect. Good. I think time-wise, we're already also
Yeah, over
getting
as usual.
quite late. Yeah, so there was some overlap with the other presentations, but I hope it was still very useful to you. And if you have any questions for us, feel free to send us an email. If you want to be involved, also feel free to send us an email, and we can have a chat.
Perfect.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys, and have a lovely evening. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.